You are listening to Seeking the Hidden Thing with Kryptos. Welcome everyone to Seeking the Hidden Thing. I'm not sure which episode this will be and what where we're at now when these get posted. For those of you that aren't aware, my hard drive died and I lost all of my templates and visuals and so forth. And so I have joining with me today the gentleman who created the intros and outros for my show, Dimes, and he has been good enough to dig them up on his computer and resend them to me. This will go up in the next few weeks, and so by the time you hear about it as an audience, this is probably a conversation that happened a couple weeks ago. But Dimes wrote another really, really good article, and I'm having him on again. And Dimes says, "Do you want to have me back so soon?" I said, "Well, sometimes this is good for building audiences like good rapport. But, you've got to stop writing really good pieces that are worth talking about." And so the piece in question, and like a dummy, I didn't post it up. I think I have it on my phone.
I got it here. It's a characteristically alienating title as well.
Yeah, a spider web of interrogations without end.
If I was smart, I would say like how to, and then just have the very simple thing. I tried to do it by having these subtitles of dissecting the vibe shift as a subtitle. But it wouldn't be a Vanguardist Journal article unless I was my own worst enemy as a writer and editor.
Well, you know what? I tend to be terrible at creating titles, and I'm an abysmal editor. I'm a big picture thinker, and so it like run on sentences with I have the curse of the German author with multiple what do you call it? Not subroutines, but it's just comma after comma after comma. And you get these like paragraph long sentences and stuff, and like, okay, this is not helping.
Well, and also I spent so long working in marketing agencies and writing copy that your bias is towards really short and punchy sentences, which I also don't like because that can seem very robotic. So you want to tilt more towards something that sounds like it was written by a human and not an AI, because an AI can just write. Although an AI has a bias towards like M dashes and weird run-on sentences as well.
There is there are certain tells now once you get used to it that you're dealing with something written by AI. And it's kind of funny that you can begin to see the style of the AI. Like AI actually has a certain style, and it's hard to get away from. And like the other thing with like the short punchy sentences is a way of quite so much dumbing down is probably not a fair way of saying it, but tailoring your writing or your speaking to a general audience.
Another thing that helped, and this is tasks. This is a thing that anyone can do when they're writing, that you should do even if it wasn't on Substack, but recording the audio narration of your Substacks. It has that function. But even if that wasn't the case, you should, whatever you're writing, read it aloud to yourself, because as I'm recording the narration, I'm reading back the piece sometimes after it's been published, and then I'm live editing it because I realize, that sounds clunky when I'm reading it aloud. So that's someone else reading it in their head too. So it sounds different in your head than their head.
Absolutely no sense. Yeah, like you read the sentence, you're like, that makes no sense whatsoever. I need to rewrite that.
Yeah, or it's like awkward and it's too long or it's too short, or it actually doesn't need to be there at all. And that's one of the job of an editor. It's paring things down, because it's very easy to just barf things on the page.
Fall in love with your own words.
Yeah. And I've had editors in the past who've, beat that out of me. So I try and do it for myself. I do it for others too, on the other authors that I've had on Vanguardist Journal. Because every paragraph you're trying to reestablish why someone's reading this, because you're in a whole universe of other writings like that. You think it's special. You think your thing is, that everyone's scheduling their time around reading yours when it goes live, but that's like one of 7 things that they're going to read that day. And if they lose focus partway through, it's gone.
Well, that is true. And the idea too, and I know this from sermon writing, is there's a temptation to include everything. So you need all of the objections, all of the nuance. And it's like, no, A piece should be like a shot, or like a rifle shot, not a shotgun blast. And so if you're going to be writing more than one piece, what you really want to do is paint with a big, bold, broad brush and make your point very, very vividly. And then the next piece you write on this subject will be the one that helps provide nuance and context. And if somebody says you've completely forgot about this article, you can say like, well, that's good. I'll write another whole piece now dealing with that. But then you can focus on that one single idea and topic all the way through to
that's a great point. It needs to not so tangential. And one thing I've noticed is very few people, and I include other editors, I'm not going to mention them by name, so I know exactly who I'm talking about. I'll tell you after. But there's editors of big magazines who also don't include links to things, or they don't show examples. And if they're talking about something that happened on the internet, or you can tell they're trying to refer to something anecdotal that they just saw, if you can include a screen cap, include a link. But if you're making a claim, at least give me something to go off of. It doesn't need to be a full paragraph explaining everything that happened, but just like, give me a link to what it is you're talking about, because they'll talk about, I saw this thing online that said, okay, where'd you read? What are you talking about? Give me a link, give me something. And there's a lot of people that don't even do that, which seems very rushed. Then you could just make shit up.
Well, and this is one of the things, and I think what they're trying to do is hold the reader in place to the finish, because this is one thing that Walter Ong talked about in terms of online writing and communication, was the addition of the hyperlink makes writing very, very non-linear in a way that a book is much more linear. Like, even if you have footnotes and so forth, and you could go and pick other books off the shelf that the footnotes refer to, and you can go down those rabbit holes, it involves a lot more effort than just clicking a hyperlink and going through, and then that article clicks you to another article to click you, and then you never ever actually end up finishing the first article because you click through to.
That's an old marketing thing too, digital marketing, where you want to keep people on the page. For the example of what I was talking about here, for the article in question, which is about this thing called the vibe shift.
Yes.
Everyone in our space has heard about. The tendency would be to assume everyone knows what you're talking about. Let's just comment on the vibe shift. But I really needed to go back and say, okay, let me just explain what this is, and I need to prove that it's real. Let me give a couple of screen caps, because I'm also writing these things where if someone sees this in a year or two, and this has happened before, a lot of podcasts suffer from this. It's difficult to listen to old podcast episodes because in each episode, they don't actually explain what they're talking about. You need to listen to the previous three. And if you're not in the context of the moment, you kind of forget what they're talking about. And so it's very difficult to go back and listen to old things. So I try and at least establish what the fuck it is we're talking about. So you can read this in 2-3 years, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, and having, well, this is one of the big things that people have criticized Elon Musk for in his takeover of Twitter, now X, is that he basically deboosts anything with a link to an external site. Yeah. And I understand that. And because the hyperlink is a very, if you're looking to keep people narrowly focused on your platform or in your piece, you really don't want to include the links in the middle of the piece. It's almost better to do it as a footnote or at the end of the piece.
That's a great point.
The link will be at the bottom. So when you get down to the bottom, you can go read the piece I'm talking about.
Absolutely. And if I can just build on that, because this is something I've dealt with for years, just so people might want to know, it's not even Elon Musk that did that. This has been the case on Twitter for years, and Meta, formerly Facebook, and I think nearly every platform except Pinterest, although Pinterest had changed. The point being that every platform wants you to spend time on the platform. And I think Facebook was the first one to change this, because they saw everyone's clicking off the platform. So they were favoring content that kept them on the platform. So a while ago, they were trying to get people to publish their articles on the platform. That's what X did recently, but Meta was the first one to do that. That's why they all got into hosting video too. Facebook was pretty early on that too, trying to get people, just host your videos here, do all your content, do it in platform, and will allow you to boost. It'll be automatically boosted more. It won't be suppressed. I'm pretty sure X does the same thing, because they were trying to get people they're trying to compete with Substack. And they're also trying to compete with they want to be, every platform wanted to be the everything platform, including Substack, which I don't care for, because people say, oh, we should have, reels on here, like on Instagram. We should have everything.
Absolutely not.
But even with advertising, because I would run campaigns on Meta, the best performing campaigns were not clicking off to the site, but if you can do a form submission in the ad itself. They want you to do everything within it as much as they can. So that's been the trend forever. I don't know if that's going to, I don't even know if they want to be the everything platform anymore, but it is what it is.
It's one of those things where, okay, so this goes back to, and we'll get to, promise you everybody, we will get to the original topic, because it's the whole idea of the vibe shift is really good. But this goes back even to like management, like Tom Peters' management theory, where he talks about the fundamental contradiction of management and organizations, is that for an organization to succeed over time, you have to be really, really good at something. Okay. So in a sense, you have to dig a deep trench, right? And that deep trench, because if you try to be good at a whole bunch of things, chances are you're going to be good at none of them. And you just become an undifferentiated mass, right? There's nothing to differentiate you from anyone else. So then why do you exist? So you have to be very good at one thing. But at the same time, to persist over time, you do also have to be able to adapt to changes and challenges in the market. So you have to be able to shift out of that groove if necessary into something new. But then that new thing that you shift into, you have to be able to do well. But you do have to be able to shift, otherwise you'll die. So there's this question of how adaptable to be, because if you're infinitely adaptable, you're not good at anything. But if you're not adaptable at all, then you're going to die. And yet, so you have to kind of keep these two seemingly paradoxical ideas together, in a sense that you have to be very, very good at something, but being willing to adapt when necessary. And the successful businesses that persist over time, or organizations, whatever, countries, groups, are able to manage to do that, to face challenges and then adapt and change with them. But it always comes down to, you have to be really, really good at something and know what that thing is, right? So for Substack, they have to be very, very good at one thing. Twitter has to be very, very good at another thing. To try to become the platform of everything means you'll likely be not good at anything. And that's death for your platform.
And also, most platforms want to expand past the audience that made them. So Substack was very big very early on for our political milieu. A lot of right-wing guys, far-right guys had Substacks. And I happen to know that the people at Substack don't love that. But that was also the case with Twitter back in the day. There's a lot of right-wing people who got on there. Then they were eventually, Night of Long Knives dizzed, and eventually became taken over by transgender sociopaths. For like many, many years, it was the worst platform you'd ever seen. Then it became okay later. But each platform has a certain type of audience capture, and they want to expand past that, sometimes at the detriment of that core audience. But we can view this from the perspective of a content creator like yourself, myself, anyone who's listening, that here's something you'll see. Someone will have 10, 15, 20,000 followers on YouTube and then 200 on X, or they've got like 20,000 on Substack, but then nothing on YouTube. They have a presence there, but the bias of a lot of corporations and old media types is that, we're going to be on every platform and do the same thing on every platform. But you become very aware that every platform is a different audience. The Substack audience is actually different than the YouTube audience, which is different than the TikTok audience. And if you want to be present on them, you kind of have to tailor your content towards that. You have to adapt to whatever that platform is, if indeed you want that audience. So, for Blood Satellite, we do that, but we have very specific goals. So our TikTok following isn't bad. It's around 1,000, but that's because it's a very specific type of content there. Vanguardist Journal that's not Blood Satellite. That's a Substack type of content that is designed to excel there. Blood Satellite makes more sense as a podcast, but each of these things are different and they need to be grown separately. And, I see some people like, I'm just going to take what I do over here and do it over there. And then it just doesn't work. But that's a marketing problem by thinking, well, who is the actual audience here? A, do I want them? B, how do I get them? And so you see a lot of these guys, that's why we got into live streams, because we're old millennials. but younger demographics are into live streams, and some people only know us from our live streams. That's an interesting thing, an interesting data point. Anyway, I'm getting too off topic, but this is for the content creators out there. That's how you need to look at it. Each platform is its own uphill battle, and is it worth it to do that?
Well, yeah, and that's kind of the interesting thing, and it's very, very hard to be good at multiple platforms at the same time. And often, if you have a big presence on one platform, it's accidental that you have a big presence on another platform, in a sense that it's usually just kind of spillover from the first platform. But for me, I started on Substack, and that is still, I think, my primary. That's where I'm the best at it. Like when I came to Twitter to largely promote my Substack, and I am decent at Twitter, and I have a decent following. Like I'm nudging up on 20,000 followers on Twitter, but I generally defy all the rules of success because I write these long meandering threads, very much like my Substack pieces. And people seem to like that. And I'm not really good at the short, pithy, quick, witty tweets. I have my moments. I've done a couple that have done a couple of short, pithy things that have done very, very well. But for the most part, it's, our mutual friend Black Horse is always ribbing me for from the movie Amadeus, too many notes, right? That's our running joke between us. Like he'll just see a thread and he'll DM me like the GIF, too many notes. And I'm like, really? It's just.
And then you'll see someone else do just the dumbest thing you've ever seen, and it gets 1 million views, and you're just like, Sally, these are drafts.
These are drafts. Exactly.
Like I'm
there's
over
no corrections. There's no, yeah. And
then I get to watch Jay Burden out stupid me because he made a point of just posting boomer stuff, and it just goes really big. I'm like, I am the Sally. I'm like, I've been posting dog shit for years, and no one cares.
And then Jay turns it into a thing just like that, and it's just like, yeah. And
effortless Jay Bird and making me look stupid at the stupid game.
Exactly.
Or like every time my buddy Prudentialist, he posts the same thing every Friday. He just posts, it's Friday night. He's got that
his
GIF.
dancing thing.
Yeah. Every single time it's like 1 million views.
Like, really? And you're like, yeah. And yeah, for me, if you look at my YouTube channel now, it's getting to the point where I almost have 1,000 followers on YouTube. But if you look at the numbers of my videos on YouTube, they border into the sad and pathetic category. Like I will post something on Substack, so it'll be like written, and then I'll do the audio recording because it helps me to edit, and also because the pieces are longer, some of my followers said, what would really help me is if I had an audio version of this. And this was before Substack was doing the AI stuff. And I asked people, do you want me to do the AI or do you want to hear me record? And they were saying, yeah, no, we'd rather hear you record than listen to the AI voice. So even though it's more work, I do it. Like I say, it helps with editing. But then I will post the same content over onto YouTube, and I will get something that will get, 3,000 downloads, 2,000, 3,000 views, 5,000, like a written piece that'll get 5,000 views on Substack, and like 4,000 downloads from a combination of Substack, Apple and so forth. And I'll post the same content on YouTube, 100 views.
Yeah. And that's because
it's just the most bizarre thing.
We did the same thing because I loved Odyssey, the platform Odyssey, and its original foundation, which was Library. I was very early into that, and it was sort of this blockchain video hosting program. And I was trying to get people to go to that. That was our only big platform because we kept getting banned from YouTube. We were banned from YouTube. We would have a much bigger following right now if we weren't banned 3 times over the years because you have to start over again and you have to build momentum. But I just liked Odyssey. And the only reason we started going back to YouTube was because every time our YouTube was banned, some people thought we stopped the show. We had like thousands of people who just thought we were gone because they only check YouTube. And then so we just had to incorporate that. And then the Odyssey platform is kind of, there's some people who do very well on Odyssey, like Blackpilled or Nation Review or something like that. But that's their only thing. but then they lost their monetization. So, you're out of luck. Like you can't accept payments on there anymore. But then some point being that YouTube is its own thing. It has its own people. And so we had to like treat that as but that means that if you make it big on YouTube and then you also have your Substack audience, you can see those as distinct audiences and kind of
they're absolutely distinct audiences. The two are not there. There's no, the overlap between Twitter and Substack is tiny, like seriously tiny.
Yeah.
Like I have like 6,000 subscribers and another 4,000 to 5,000 followers on Substack. And I'll bet you 5% of those also follow me on Twitter.
And to me, the reason we're talking about this is because I just find this interesting, and I try and make people aware of this information because I know a lot of people who get into creating content or they want to start a show and no one really talks about this stuff. Everyone keeps it as this closely guarded secret. No one wants you to know that your biggest creator you can think of is in like 5 different group chats and everyone's got an agreement to boost each other's content. But because some people are struggling, like, how do these guys get so many views? Like, well, that's how. I'm not saying that's bad.
They make friends. And then, because I look at, so I'm in probably in like 5 group chats of which, 3 or 4 of them, I just, basically scan and see if there's something interested. I will maybe throw in a comment every couple of days. But just from a time perspective, I have 2 group chats that I am largely, one that people in my Substack will know, the Christian Ghetto group chat. And then the other one is a small group of Canadians that basically discuss Canadian politics. And it's, between those 2 group chats, but the Christian Ghetto, I look at like a number of guys that when we first brought them in or we joined together to form that group, like most of us were accounts of like 2,000-3,000, and, I'll bet you other than the guys that just don't post a lot because they don't post a lot, then their accounts don't grow as a result of it. Most of the guys who have become a part of that group chat have seen their accounts grow significantly. And it's basically a combination of like workshopping content. People like you're just having a normal conversation in a group chat and you say something clever and somebody will go post that. And you're just like, oh yeah. So, find an image and post that, and you're like, dude, then the next thing you've got your post that gets 50,000 views and, 2,000 likes. And, you've added another 30 followers, 40 followers onto your, but growth really happens that way. And it's just sometimes it's just lucking out and getting the right guys together. And don't have women in your group chats. Just
we have some over the time. We've had a few, and it's caused a lot of problems. But I like to welcome them.
We have nothing against women, but it's just like you've got to keep your misogyny high. It's just for whatever reason, inviting women into your group chat. Well, actually, I know the reasons. It's just there's a certain number. There's the rare handful of women that can be in a men's group chat and not completely mess it up. But for the most part, it completely changes the dynamic in any group chat. So if you want to get a group of guys together to discuss stuff, you've got to keep it just guys.
Yeah, and we break all the rules of the blood satellite community because, but it's caused problems where the biggest misogynist of the group will see a girl and start trying to hit on her online, or a reasonable guy will say like just start hurling threats at her. Like things happen that you don't expect. But also the types of women you usually get joining these group chats are kind of odd themselves, especially for a show like Blood Satellite. So they're usually, it's like that phrase, the odds are good, but the goods are odd. I'm always reminded of that. Like you're going to get abnormal types across the board in these. So when you get a gender dynamic like that, it's weird shit happens. People start hooking up. People start they start dating each other online. I've seen that happen. I didn't think people did. Oh my God. I'm old. Like, to me, when I was young, having an online girlfriend was seen as kind of lame. All the younger guys do it now. So I don't know.
Yeah, no, it does happen like with alarming frequency, but that's kind of the thing. But yeah, that's, when you look at, nobody gets to be a largish, Substack or Twitter account on their own. It just doesn't happen that often. Everybody,
Yeah.
you have people that rise with you. And that's the other thing too, though, in that I think a lot of people don't really like clout chasing and trying to attack larger accounts and so forth. That's like death. You're never going to grow by attacking guys on your side whose accounts are bigger than you are. It just isn't going to happen.
And again, just to establish to people, we're really not trying to big ourselves up here, especially because Kruptos is bigger than me. So he's got nothing to gain. I have everything to gain. I'm desperate. But the point is that I like people to know this stuff because there was like a golden age of content creation where you could just release a video and it organically ranks and it can become popular. Yes. These days, you need tricks and hacks because the scene is so saturated. There's so many people doing so many things, and the platforms are rejiggering things and algorithmically suppressing or inflating. Like you can't do it normally anymore if you want to make it on all platforms. Yeah, unfortunately, unless you're in the news, like unless you're like a big name and you get doxxed or something.
To do news. It's like, but the thing is for me, like I was not. It's just because timing when I came online, even though I jumped right into Substack because I kind of did my research and that's how I started was, I did like best blogging platforms and did my research, like any autistic guy will, you know what I mean? And then I ended up on Substack and I was right at the tail end of early adoption. So I benefited, as you say, from that kind of organic growth. And I was still in a time when you could use Twitter to promote your Substack, and it would be possible if people liked your article, to get, like 1,000 likes on an article, which never happens today. And so I was able to go organically before making a lot of friends on Twitter, and I think to grow, in excess of I was over 1,000 follows, like subscribers before. Basically I think it was really, even though I started by pestering Charles Haywood and he suggested, because Charles had his site with doing reviews and he suggested I start writing because my emails to him were high quality. He said, you should be sharing this stuff with people. Right. And so I did that. But then in terms of making it on the scene, it really wasn't until Geo found me. And I had me on his show, and then Prudentialist had me on his show, that things began to really take off. But by that time, I was already organically up over 1,000 subscribers. It's much more difficult to, like, as you say, it's much more difficult to do that today. It's hard. It's unfortunate that way, that you really need to, you need to persist long enough to build a network of friends that you can then, grow, like smart people that you can grow together. And then you have to be loyal to the people that help get you there. So that's
why I always liked Telegram, by the way, because Telegram, I don't know if that's the case anymore, but when I got on it so many years ago, it's a weird thing to say being so long in that fucking place, but it's not intuitive. You need to be, a lot of these group chats, you can't just search for them. You need to be invited, or someone needs to know you. And so there's this different sort of vetting process in there, and people can kind of become known in the sphere just by being in all these chats and stuff. But that's a lot more similar to how human beings interact. That's why I always thought Telegram was a superior platform just for meeting real people and having discussions. Whereas X, it's this whole other thing. Like, people kind of need to make themselves into personas on there, and there's tricks and hacks and strategies and everything. But I don't know. I just dig Telegram, and I hope it doesn't turn out to be a giant honeypot. I don't know how they make money. I actually don't know how Telegram makes money for the amount of like full movies and just the file hosting alone on that platform. They're not making money off of memberships. I know that for sure, but I don't know what's going on.
Interesting. That's one of those things that sometimes you just don't stop to think about, like, oh yeah, how do these people keep making money? And because that you can't stay in line forever online without making.
Well, because we know YouTube loses money every year, but they're just more or less a monopoly in the video hosting space. But they do it just for that market share. But with Telegram, I'm like, we host all our files in Telegram. We have a special dedicated channel just called the Blood Satellite World, where all of our videos, all the audio, everything in there, and I can do that for free, and anyone could get high quality, multimedia content on there. But I'm like, I don't know. the storage costs alone for this platform, I can't even wrap my head around it. Because also people are like they're uploading entire movies and saying, "Boom, here you can watch it on the platform too, stream it." I'm like, I don't understand this anymore.
Well, Athenian Stranger also does the same thing with a lot of. I think he takes a lot of basically like translation works, scholarly writings that just don't make, and then also old PDFs of books that are just sitting on some shelf in a library that somebody's digitized. And then, because, when are you going to have access to that library in Göttingen in Germany? Like, you're just not, right? But so somebody will find it, scan it, and then post it. But Athenian has like apparently just, I've never, because I don't have time to read everything. If I hit him up and say, "Hey, can you hook me up with your Telegram channel with all of the resources?" That would be, I'd be in just like that. But he's got it there, and he uses, and he often talks about this on Twitter. So it's not like it's a big secret that is out there. But he has, just like you say, massive amounts of material for scholarly research that a lot of guys just lean on because it's the place to find stuff that you can't find anywhere. That's just really difficult to unearth. And even on like book sites like Anna's Archive, or like there's some books you can't get, but I can find it on one of my buddies' Telegram pages, which is forget Amazon, forget libraries. Like exactly. And he does it just strictly because, it's useful for academic research, because the guys that move in his really tight circle, they just want the highest quality academic first, like primary source material, all this kind of stuff, right? And like you say, it's all there. Like, people are just hosting this stuff on Telegram. Never thought really about sort of the cost benefits and whether they can actually make money.
I'm a big advocate of the unsung heroes of this entire space, which are the archivists, and I know a few, and these guys are thanklessly backing up every show, because sometimes people get banned from platforms and then their content's just gone, except for some of these guys that just vacuum everything up, re-upload it, all these old shows that you can't find anywhere else. You can find it on there. And, they do it for free. And, those people aren't, celebrated enough, but just like with books, with music, with anything produced from this space, there need to be a few people just maintain that. Otherwise it's just gone.
Yeah.
Like years of things.
Yeah. Well, let's shift.
Yeah,
let's shift. It's good, and somebody's going to enjoy this stuff. And this is the fun thing about doing a show, because I decided a while back that I'm not going to hustle to get guests. I'm not going to work to try to do a show every Thursday, and I'm just a person driven by interesting conversations. And I try to keep them in many ways, not always, but, in and around this discourse of navigating our current reality successfully towards, a positive outcome, in a sense. So because I'm a parallelist, so there's a lot of those types of things, but a lot of it is just trying to understand our situation, where we're at. And so for me, interesting conversations with interesting people. I don't even try to do interview shows. I just want to get on here and have a conversation. And if we spend a half hour talking something else before actually getting to the topic that we originally agreed to talk about, I'm fine with that. And I think the audience has generally, for the most part, appreciated that. So I don't worry about it at all too much. This is my show, and I do it for me, and people seem to like it, and they subscribe, and they do paid subscriptions, which is wonderful. So thank you all for that.
He makes it look so easy, doesn't he? Like, he's just like, "Oh yeah, I just produce things and people pay me and they love it and everyone loves me and I'm popular." Whatever.
Thank you, times. Yeah, they're just we're exposing the discourse and its emptiness right now. Yeah,
it's me. I'm out here. I'm like, who can I fight today on X to get a crumb of relevance?
Yeah, who can I clout chase today?
I'm just in like, I'm a reply guy, just like making nobodies unhappy. I just waste time on X. You should post your articles on there. I should, but here's what I can do. I can post indecipherable memes at someone whose account is 2 days old.
Yeah, and don't let Dimes kid you. Dimes is a gentleman whose influence extends far beyond his follower counts and his view counts. As it's probably been mentioned before, I mean, how many of the intros and outros to most of the shows that people probably watch have you done?
Well, that's the thing.
And it's the behind scenes and organizing real world events and so forth too that you are also instrumental in handling as well too. So sometimes the guy who's behind the scenes and is far more important than he looks, has a tiny follower count, but actually wields a ton of influence because he doesn't do it on the timeline.
Yeah, and also that's I view as a professional thing. So with everyone we deal with, I treat them as a client. And
yes.
Having said that, with that in mind, I try not to broadcast if I'm the one that did it, because maybe they would like people to think that they did it or their team did it. So it's just like a professional courtesy thing, which is why we're even hesitant to have a portfolio unless we get it approved by the guest. But then you don't want to, make the relationship complicated. So that's one of those things where, again, another segmented part of it that I could be more of a whore in that sense if I want to be. But, we like to put the client first,
Well, yeah,
because also maybe it hurts them if they know that, oh, Dimes, maybe we don't like his show. Now we don't like you because you're associated with him. There's all these little internal politics that we like to just take that headache out of people's skulls if we can.
Well, okay. So here's the thing is, for example, like we've mentioned before, Burden redid the intros and outros to his show probably a year ago or so. Right. And I really liked that. And I said, hey, who did your new music? And then, so I got the name of Jay's music guy and I hit him up. Now he's very quiet about it. And then I said, hey, I love your new visuals, because Jay sent that to me and he said, what do you think? This is going to be what's going up on the show. And I'm like, oh, that's awesome, Jay. Like, who did that for you? Right. Because I've been kind of thinking about doing like opening visuals for my show. And he says, oh yeah, Dimes did that for me. And I went, like, Dimes? Like the Dimes, like on Twitter? And I was like, yeah, he said Dimes did that for me. That's what he does. And I'm like, oh, I said, like, we're mutuals and in group chats. I never even knew that. And I was like,
Yeah, because also, we want to maintain the Beaver Gang mystique as well. And I love the music that he did as well. And anytime I work with someone, I try and like broadcast their, like, even when we did that short video of Paving Over the Public, like I really want to bring attention to the musicians involved, because a lot of them do it for free or for way, way less. And my design partner is Censored Anon. He runs, we collaborate on a lot of things. He does all of the short video clips for the Blood Satellite channel as well. That 3D room, I provide him a bunch of stuff and he kind of puts it together. But I mean, we've been working together for years. And so it's like over time, you end up with just a crew of these highly skilled, highly effective people. But also you realize that the money in the space is somewhat limited, and you don't want to gouge people because you're aware, like, what can people reasonably pay for an intro versus what a corporation could pay. So you're not trying to swindle people in the space. That's something we're careful about, but that also means that there's limited money to be made. So you're seeing a lot of people in the space navigate that, which is, how can we find an audience outside of the distant right or whatever it might be?
Well, the balance between my time and my work have value, and it's reasonable to expect value in return for that, with recognizing that the clients that we're working with are generally not wealthy and not getting wealthy off of this. So how can we balance the value of our time and not, like, as you say, trying to soak the people that are benefiting from this? And so that's, and I think you've maintained a good balance. So I found value for the money. So I love my intros and outros.
I'm glad. And you were a dream client to work with. And I don't say that about everyone, because some of them are more difficult than others. And I won't name names, obviously, but for what it's worth, you were a dream client to work with.
I think it helps, though, that I have an art and design background. Like, I went to, back in the 80s, I went to Ontario College of Art. So it's in that sense, I'm probably better than most. And the same thing too, after dropping out of art school, I worked as a mechanic, got like 3.5 years into a mechanic's apprenticeship. People say, well, do you fix your own car? And I said, no, I just have intelligent conversations with my mechanic now. And it's the same way too, is that, so when I set out to do a design project, I have more or less kind of, here's what I would like it to look like. This is the kind of vibe that I want to get. And you go with it. And if you hit that vibe, even if it wasn't what I was thinking about in my mind ahead of time, if you captured the vibe, I'm like, oh, that was exactly, that isn't the way I would have done the vibe, but you've captured it, and I'm really good with that. And that's, I think, that's one of the best things about collaborating.
And that's a good thing that you have. The vibe thing is very important. That can kind of dovetail with what we're going to talk about right now. But it's like some people, when they don't have a design background, they have what they think is an image in their head. And if that's not reproduced in front of them, then they think it's a failure. However, they don't know that maybe their biases are holding back a superior design. And that's something I had to come to terms with early in my career, which is that I've got a very specific style, and that might work for me, but it obviously doesn't work for everyone. And there's certain styles that I can't do. So you need a team of people who are very confident in their styles to maybe collaborate or specialize in something. But you're also aware of, okay, maybe the thing that I have in my head isn't like what this person presented to me, but is it better? Can I admit that? That's different than what I wanted, but it still captures the essence of what I wanted, perhaps even better. A lot of people struggle with that. Or they see, just the non-ability to replicate what the vague thing they have in their mind, especially if they can't sketch anything out themselves. So that's why dealing with executives is difficult. Or you'd be surprised how many creatives are in advertising and marketing that have no design acumen whatsoever.
I can imagine it's one of those things where I think from the person doing the work is that you have to be good at hearing the client. Now, there's two separate skills. There's the difference between actually hearing the client and making the client feel heard. I've always been good at hearing people without necessarily always, say, on an interpersonal, like, you're listening to their problems, making them feel heard. But there is a sense where when the artwork comes back or the design work comes back, that the client has that sense that they've been heard. And even if it isn't the image that they had in their mind, the material that has been presented back to them says from the designer, like, oh my word, you really did listen to me. And that really captures what it is that I'm looking for.
That's why being in the room with them helps. And just passing files back and forth is difficult. And I found that if I'm passing a file back and forth, it comes with an email that's 3 paragraphs long trying to justify it, versus if I'm in the room with them, I can prove to them, like, here was how I got inside your head. Here's how I interpreted it.
Like, here, look at this element and what's going on here. Remember when you said this and da-da-da-da-da.
The most important thing also
at me, and I'm trying to find, this is what this, I'm trying to capture that with this image or whatever. Right. And like, for example, if you take my intro video, there's like there's the 2 scenes. There's the graveyard, right? Which is, to me, captured this whole idea that we're sort of at the end of the age, and we're facing the doom of our culture, and we're in the midst of the ruins in the graveyard, right? But then you also balance it with the image of the monastery in the foggy valley up on the hill, right? And so you've got the religious aspect, but yet it's shrouded in the fog. And then the one that I really love was the one of the fog rolling over the mountain, right? And the sense of movement of the fog. And you're sort of, in a sense of, you're trying to capture this mystical thing that's just sort of slipping away as it kind of comes over the mountain. And like, oh, that's just, so in a sense of, you're like seeking the hidden thing. And it's just like, in terms of understanding what I do for content and the kind of the vibe that I wanted, I'm like, oh, this is not how I would have presented it, but it's perfect.
Yeah. And also, if you're trying to dissect it, you'd say we're sort of juxtaposing the immovable with motion, or the death and the eternal. Like, what is a cemetery? And this is where you get into deep conversations of symbolism, and symbolism is very important. The one example I always give people, and you probably know this too, where the example I gave, I heard this a long, long time ago from a designer by the name of Rob Schraub, who did my favorite comic, Scud the Disposable Assassin. But he was expressing how to draw a banana. He says, yeah, you can make a banana shape, and if you make it green, everyone says, well, that's not a banana, that's a pepper. And you can explain to them at length that, no, there's plantains, there are green bananas. In fact, bananas come green a lot of the time, but no, that's a pepper. You can't tell me it's not pepper. It doesn't become a banana until it's yellow. And so you have to understand that it's not a logical thing. You have to understand what these symbols are unpacked as in people's minds. So if you look at a cemetery, you might think, oh, me, that's death. I don't want death. But there's something eternal about the cemetery. death along with the eternal. There's something solemn. There's a solemnity to this. And that's why if you put that up against the fog rolling over the mountains, these thematically track. So one thing we'd always say to clients if we're presenting something, it's that don't even view this as yourself, view this as your audience or your customer or whatever. And that's very difficult for people to do. It's not intuitive. And that's the problem with the creators as well, like myself. Oftentimes you read your article as someone who's revised this 7 times. So you're not viewing it for the first time anymore. It's very difficult to do that. That's why I said reading it aloud helps with that, or taking time away. Like every version we do, usually by the time anything goes to a client, we've let it sit for 1 or 2 days, walked away, done some other stuff, come back, view it with new eyes. A lot of people don't do that. They just stress and stare and fixate, and then it goes live. And then you're surprised that's not being read or received the same way that you thought it would. So you have to take yourself outside yourself and view it like that. Very difficult to do with a client. Very difficult to do with a client that's very confident in what they think their audience wants, but they've never thought about it like that before.
Yeah, no, and it's very difficult to put yourself into the mind of your audience. Like, why is this person actually listening to me or reading my stuff? And and now there's a danger of again playing to your audience, and this will get back to the vibes thing that we're talking about. There's a danger of playing to your audience in a sense of like, if you get fixated on the question of like, what does my audience want to read, or what do I think that they're here for? Now there is a certain thing where an audience does begin to have expectations, and it's very, very hard not to play to the expectations of your audience once you begin to figure them out, because especially if it's monetized, then this creates a revenue stream. But even without monetization, there is like, we talk about on Twitter, you have doom scrolling, but as your account grows, the bigger problem is not doom scrolling, but actually dopamine scrolling.
Yeah.
Which is scrolling through your likes and comments. You can spend more time scrolling through your likes and comments and responding to likes and comments than you can actually looking on the timeline. Like dopamine scrolling is much worse than doom scrolling. And so there is this sense that then if you don't have a strong internal vision of why I'm here, what am I writing about, what's the point of my being here, that it's very, very easy to get sucked into a dialectic with your own audience. And you don't necessarily want to break that dialectic with your audience, but in a sense, you as a content creator want to be driving the narrative of why you're there, and having a real sense of internal vision of, and this goes for Twitter or whatever too, of answering the question. People ask, well, why do some accounts grow or not grow or whatever? Well, because some guys just have no idea why they're there. And if you have no idea why you're there, you're never going to grow big. I mean, you might do it accidentally, but probably not.
And also not being confident in your own style. Like for example, the most popular article on Vanguard's journal was one that was a speech. It's just a transcript of the speech. I wrote it to be a speech, which meant that I wrote it differently than the other articles, which meant that I was probably overwriting the articles. I was writing, very early on, I was trying to make it so this is the serious stuff. Blood satellites over here, but I'm going to be serious over here. And as these have gotten more successful, I've noticed it's because I've been writing more in my voice. I wasn't trying
your speaking voice, as if
my spoken voice, but also like having more humor in it, having more irreverence, where that was completely absent in the early ones. But not as crazy as the show, because the show is unhinged. But
that's a good descriptor.
Yeah, but I'm no longer trying. And, I was listening to this interview with David Foster Wallace, and he was discussing going to see Blue Velvet by David Lynch, and he was describing what makes a great artist, what makes a great voice, and he said it's singular. It's something that is unapologetically itself, and I think, regardless of whether or not you like David Lynch, I love David Lynch, but his artistic voice was wholly his own. It could not have been anyone else's. He was unapologetically himself. And I think that's what you should strive to be. And so sometimes in your writing, you'll be running from your actual voice, or you'll be adopting a voice that you think you need to adopt. I think that's why people like you so much, because you are genuine. You're not trying to be a different guy. Whereas maybe early on in my writing, I'm like, I'm going to try and be this other version of myself. And now I'm writing, for better or worse, in who I am, which is pretty irreverent. I'm always trying to do funny shit even in my conversations. So as I've become more of myself in my writing, I think people are liking it more. And the reason I say that is that's a lesson to anyone else thinking that you need to put on a different suit and tie to do something rather than just being authentic. And in doing that, you will discover who it is you are.
Mm.
And it won't be maybe the person you idolize yourself. Like a lot of artists early on, you will be adapting the former style of someone you idolize. You'll be doing a version of that. This is kind of the next step where you're like, well, I'm not going to just rip someone off, but I'm going to be trying to be what I think they represented rather than being 100% yourself and being something that no one else could ever replicate.
Mm. And as you were talking about it, like I think of one of the things in terms of sort of being myself, that in a different life, I could have easily have been a professor of philosophy or something. And that means, doing the monographs, doing the academic work. And there's a whole segment of guys who are really deep into, philosophical academics, where they write they do the scholarly analysis of different phrases and what is he saying here and trying to, and I realized that in doing my work, I'm going to quote people from time to time, which I do fairly regularly. But I'm not going to do scholarship. I'm writing my own stuff. And sometimes even when I'm doing a deep dive on a book, I'm presenting the author's ideas through the lens of how I see them as significant. So there's never, I'm not doing scholarship. I'm just doing writing. So if I write something and there's like an idea that has cropped in my head and I actually happen to remember where I got it from, I may sort of say, oh, I picked this up from here, but I'm not going to go back and do a scholarly discussion on, the correct interpretation of this and this passage as a building the foundation for my argument. We're just not going to spend the time doing it. I'm not doing scholarship. We're doing writing that is academic adjacent, but is just more of what did I get out of this material, and what do I think you should, how do I think you should take away? What should you take away from this? And so when I say look at something like Jacques Ellul, it's always a mixture of me and Ellul. It's never just getting at the heart of what is Ellul exactly saying. And I'm not really trying to do that. I'm not trying to find out what the correct interpretation of Jacques Ellul is, because I don't care. Right. What really matters for me is the significance of Jacques Ellul for the moment. So if my presentation of Ellul ends up being partly me and partly Ellul, I'm not particularly fussed by that. And that's one of those conscious decisions I made in starting the blog that, listen, we're not going to do academics and we're not going to do scholarly research. And I'm not really going to focus on the correct interpretation of Ellul. I'm just going to do what's the significance of Ellul in this moment according to my vision of how I read Ellul.
And to his credit, that's what Charles Haywood also does. If anyone looks at his book reviews, is that it's very contextual to what the beliefs of Charles Haywood are, whether or not he likes or dislikes a book or what he chooses to highlight in that book. But other than that, why does anyone need another book review? The value of Charles Haywood's book reviews is that you're getting the Charles Haywood take versus something an AI could present to you, which was just give me a book summary. And that's something that we try and do on our show as well. When I'm discussing a book, I mean, I rather take very copious notes on every book, pages and pages. Then I pare that down 2 or 3 times. And then I need to try and fashion this into something that no one can get anywhere else, or why I think it's important. So a lot of that is myself editorializing it. But other than that, you just read the Wikipedia page or read it yourself. You know what I mean? Like, but what are you actually doing to make these ideas relevant to the audience? And that's going to come with your own style, your own biases, but that's the right way to do it, I think.
And I mean, I would argue in the end that, my interpretation of Ellul is, unless somebody disputes it, is the correct interpretation. But that's kind of the way to go, right? That's your own conceits, right?
Yeah.
And again, so let's this gets us back to, now that we've raised Ellul and I've been doing and partly the thing that grabbed me about this article of yours was this notion that this idea that vibes matter, and that I just lost dimes. This idea that vibes matter, and I may have to. Oh, there we go.
Sorry.
There we go. And you're back. You dropped out for a second.
It automatically switches the camera off and then everything breaks. Sorry, I could hear you the whole time.
Okay, there we go. That's good. Okay. And this idea that, the idea of like, in many ways, people talk about the vibes as if the vibes are the most important thing. And that I think there's a lot of folks that don't understand the nature of, modern mass communication, social media, and the degree to which the technological society, these mass media things, and then also propaganda itself in its multitude of forms, frame our discourse. And this is one of the things that Heidegger talked about technologies as enframing us. And the reason why understanding the concept of enframing is so important in a layman's term, not to necessarily get specific again, like what's the correct interpretation of Heidegger and proper, how did Heidegger understand enframing? But this idea that the frame that you're in, you interact with the frame, but you don't actually interact with the reality itself behind the frame. And the technological world, the mass media, it's kind of like, one way to see it is that, you drive by, say, a house fire or a bad car accident, and you go and turn on the local evening news to see if it made the news. And somehow the fact that it made the news makes the event more real than the event itself.
Absolutely. Even Marshall McLuhan speaks on this when he speaks about the auto amputation of our senses. And he says every media form, and he includes not only television, but also tools, anything that extends your senses. You could think of that even visually, extending it out. But through the extension and exposing it to all this new information, you almost need to numb it or auto amputate it. And so by extending our visual sense into the digital realm, we've had to sort of numb ourselves to it. But that means that it's something that we focus on more, but we feel less when we stare at it. There's a lot at play here with then there's the media type, then the technology form. And sometimes those are conjoined and sometimes they're not. But,
a good way to look at it, and this is like, say, for example, of, say, technology of manufacturing. So let's say you begin with a craftsman, and you're tool using creatures in a sense, like all tools are technology. So you start with a few craftsman tools, and you're making stuff. You're using your hands. You have a feel from the material. You're using these hand tools, and then what happens is you develop a means of mechanizing a certain portion of it. Maybe you develop a hand tool that allows you to repeat a thing, and you just like a press or something, even a hand press, or maybe it's a water driven tool. Now there's a certain connection with the water and so you're attached to it, but now you're sort of no longer maybe dealing with the material as directly as you were before. And then from there, you can mechanize it further, and, you're managing a machine where the materials are just going through and you have minimal contact with the machine, but you're actually in physical contact with the machine. And then you can maybe take it one step further. And now you're sitting in a control room and you're watching the machines and you have no connection at all with the control room. And then you could take it even one step further where you have a guy who's managing the software that's being used in the control room to deal with the processes, and he's halfway around the world.
Yeah. To his credit,
I thought what you were trying to capture with this idea of vibes is that you're the guy halfway around the world looking at the software that's being used in the control room, and you have actually no connection with any reality at all. And yet you're saying, I've got a sense of the vibes that something is changing with the material in the control room. And you're going like, what are you basing that on?
Yeah, but it's so complicated from that distance, from that vantage point, you almost don't want to even approach it. And to his credit, just to build off what you were saying there, this was what Marx was saying about, I know a lot of people don't like Marx, but if you actually read Capital, that was what he was describing with this phenomenon called the surplus, that you would begin with this commodities and labor. And over time, in what he described as the capitalist frame, you started tethering labor to time, and then you had this thing called the surplus, which was profit, which was, it's not just a one-to-one ratio of labor to product. You can make things faster, which means it's less time to make the thing. So you have this extra money. It's this extra free floating thing. And then that becomes the whole reason, the raison d'etre for you to have the business to begin with. It's no longer to just create a product with labor, it's to maximize this new idea called surplus. And so you're fixated on this other thing. And just like you were saying there, this business used to be creating a thing with a tool, and now it's the management of processes, or the management of processes that manage other processes. And there's this phenomenon I always get in trouble for saying phenomenon versus phenomenon, that was discussed in that book, Disillusionment of the World, where we're always stepping back. We're stepping back from things the more we understand them to get a 360-degree view of them. And so what I was describing in the piece, it was also described in this book called Decadence by Jim Haugen. He was saying that the Western man is the meta man. So he's always analyzing himself, not only analyzing the world, but stepping back and standing outside of himself and analyzing himself, analyzing the world. And what does that mean? And then stepping outside that, what does it mean that I'm analyzing myself? So we're always, you can say that's hooked in with the psychoanalytic movement, but I think it's something much deeper than that, that we're always trying to not only understand us, but understand our understanding. And that's where philosophy reigns and the metaphysics reigns, the system of systems. So what I was saying with the idea of vibes, just to give people an idea of what we're talking about, you'll hear that on X. You'll hear that in the discourse. People say the vibe has shifted. There's been a vibe shift. Some people say it's good. Some people say it's bad. And one example would be Trump. Vibes shifted on Trump. It used to be really dangerous to talk about liking Trump, and now it's not. So they'll just say, oh, they lick their finger, feel which way the wind's blowing. Oh, the vibe shifted. That's good for us. Whereas I was saying, and then people will actually step back and say, well, what is the vibe? Now you're talking about the vibe as if it's its own thing. Like Marx would speak of the surplus. The vibe is not an amalgamation of other things. It's just, there's this thing called the vibe, and I like the vibe. The vibe is good. The vibe, it can be viewed unto itself, which is a strange thing. And I always said, no, to me, and not to, criticize any listeners or anything, but that's a very feminine framing. That's almost a prey position to be in, by saying that it used to be scary and now it's not scary. So it's safe to talk about. Whereas I would say, no, we're all spurgs. We're all schizos. What actually happened? It's important to look at what actually happened. So the example of Trump really hasn't changed that much, hasn't really changed his policy. He hasn't changed his policy position since the 90s, really, if you want to look at it. He's been talking about tariff stuff. There was a period where you would get fired if you liked Trump, and now everyone's on board with Trump. But did the world change? Did Trump change? What actually happened? And there's a few things that happened. Here's a big one. Most of the hatred towards Trump, and I don't care what your feelings are about Trump, this isn't a Trump endorsement segment. I'm just saying that the media apparatus was aligned against Trump, and the journalist class was primarily responsible for that. They all got fired. They're not there anymore. A lot of these outlets just got rid of them. They went over to Substack, and then no one likes them, and now they're just gone. So the media changed, but that's real people losing their jobs. That's a thing that happened. Here's another thing that happened. Trump was shot in the head. There's a lot of, but we can look at this thing called the vibe shift and look at it as 5 distinct occurrences that led to it, but it's not actually Trump really changing his position. And maybe that's not good for us. Maybe the fact that the vibe shifted and it's more mainstream acceptable to like Trump, maybe that means he's less interesting. Maybe the MAGA movement is less dissident, less revolutionary, less relevant to our interests. So to me, it's not like the whole world changed their mind on this one guy. There's institutional reasons that he's more acceptable, but also maybe he compromised some of his positions. Maybe not, but like those are the distinct things we should discuss, not this surplus entity we know as vibes, as if it's just, as if that's metaphysics, and it's not. And so there's some people that are trying to make you think that vibes are the be all end all, or it's some kind of new spirituality or metaphysics. And I'm trying to reject that and bring people back to, let's be a bit more skeptical about what's happening, because if we can understand that, we can understand whether or not this is good or bad for us, for our group, our people, or whatever it might be.
Well, and this also then, I think, dovetails into something that I've noticed with the Trump regime. And it's something that Trump as a showman has always been really, really good at, is, message manipulation. So it's the way to look at it is from a propaganda perspective, and Alul talks about this, is that one of the things that happens in the news is that you're constantly fixated on a story from today. And so what happens is the more fixated you are on the news and what's happening. So the more fixated you are on the timeline on Twitter, the more fixated you are on what news event is happening, the more that you become, that you kind of float in the present. You don't remember past stories. You don't really have any idea of what's happening in the future. What is happening right now is this moment that kind of floats, disconnected from actual reality. You're just basically focused on it. And once you're focused on this news event on a day-to-day basis, the propagandist has you, because because you don't remember anything in the past, and he can then begin to interject into his framing of the present. And so you're basically, once you're locked into the timeline and the discourse that's on the timeline, once you're locked into news and news reporting, you are basically in many ways at the mercy of the propagandist. And so my argument, and like Haywood disagreed with me, as I said, a lot of the early shaping of Trump's early policies were red meat for his base. They were specifically designed to create vibes before they were designed to create real world effects. And like the real world effects of tariffs are going to take months and months, maybe years, to really fully appreciate the thing. If you just kind of do it quietly without a big lot of hoopla, but if you throw in the red meat and you create the vibes, so then the real event isn't even necessarily the actual tariff changes. The real event is now the vibes.
Yeah, exactly.
And
there's
people feel about. So so what really happened is that a large segment of people were totally excited about the tariff changes, and the tariffs themselves don't actually matter, and they're actual real world effects. And whether they're a good thing, a bad thing, whether they were well implemented, poorly implemented, that really doesn't matter. All that matters is the vibes about the tariff.
Yeah. And of course, on top of that, if you're locked in the moment, you're locked into whatever the news of the day is, and you're convinced that the vibe has shifted against Trump and that things are on the way and there's this other force at work, then everything he does has to be weighted against that context. Like if he does something you don't like, you're saying, well, how does that fit in with the vibes? I'm convinced that the vibe has shifted. So this can't be obviously something stupid or against my interests. It must be some Machiavellian power play. So you're giving this thing called the vibe shift primacy in the discussion of real world events. And the tariff is a great one. Like that very quickly shifted into, America First types being at war with Europe and Canada, right? Now it's about the relationship. Now it's about Canadian annexation. It's all this other stuff versus what it was. It's just an economic move. It's a trade.
We're going to punish them for ripping us off.
Now it's about Pearl Harbor. Now it's about Aztecs. Now it's about fucking Napoleon. It's a bunch of other stuff because it's treated as just this sort of almost like a weird metaphysical esoteric thing that anyone can participate in, but you're distancing yourself. It's more of an analysis of the vibe itself rather than just a thing that happened that can be contrasted against other things that happened, which is what you should care about to figure out if this is good for you or if you're being had.
Well, and the thing is that you have to understand this, because this is something also that Walter Ong notices, is that it's not possible, and this is the kind of thing why you have to understand that this is important. It's not possible to simply, Heidegger says that we're all inframed and we're not. What we need to do is just touch grass and get back in touch with reality. Well, that doesn't work, and Walter Ong notices going back very early, because you say to even take a technology, and probably one of the most significant technologies, and you talk about the distance that's created in our mind where we examine ourselves and we watch ourselves watching ourselves. Well, a lot of that comes about because of, first of all, writing and then print, and then you even notice the feminine character of it, because that interiorizes us, gets us looking at our feelings, looking at our emotions. And so writing creates, like writing and print create a feminine turn, even at the same time that they allow the kind of abstract thinking that makes, science and technology possible. They are at the same time feminizing the culture. It's a really weird kind of dynamic, but it's all happening because of writing. But the point here, though, with Ellul, he says, even if you go back to Plato, who was noticing changes that writing brought about, what was the medium that he used to criticize the effects of writing? What was the written word? So we're trapped in a sense of now we live in this meta reality that is disconnected from the actual reality. So we're here online observing the effect of the vibe shift, but what is the medium that we're using? The very same medium that the vibe shift, quote unquote, is happening within, and it's disconnected. So we're operating within the same medium that the people who are getting wrapped up in this medium and being driven by it, and being manipulated by the vibe shift. We're noting this phenomenon, but we're not doing it from outside of that frame. We're doing it from within the frame of the media, because that's what the media demands of us, because we have to do it in the highest form of the medium. So we have to do it on social media. We have to do it on podcasting. We have to do it in in YouTube videos, because in a sense, just like Plato had to note the changes that writing was having on memory and other things, he had to do it using writing. We have to do it using podcast shape. So in a sense, we're participating in the vibe shift and this quote unquote vibes, even as we're critiquing it and saying, hey, people, don't get caught up in the vibes.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I try to express in the piece, which is that I don't think we actually can return. That's what people say. We have to rise to the occasion of the times, of the historical period. And that's what Jim Haugen, there's this part in the book, in this great book called Decadence, that's very hard to find, but he was discussing the counterculture movement in America. And there's this great part later on in the book. He would have been, I think, a Gen Xer. I might be wrong there, but he was discussing going to, I think it was Puerto Rico. It was some Caribbean island maybe, and discussing what it was like to be amongst those people as a Westerner, as an American man. He was a journalist, I believe. And he could vacation there, and he could say, these people, they live in the moment. They don't think like we do in America. They're free from all that. But over time, as he spent more and more days there, he found himself, he was bothered, maybe not bothered, but he found himself unable to interact with them at the same level as Westerner, because these people could not live in that meta sense. They could not analyze themselves. His drive was to not only analyze himself, but also the situation, and then himself analyzing the situation, like live in that sort of very aware contextual sense, and they didn't. And so that was disconcerting to him at some point, because that's not how he's built. And I don't know, there's a great critique by even Julius Evola that even traditionalists live within the liberal context, which is true. And,
it is true.
And we discussed, I discussed in a previous article where I don't know how you can even remove yourself from that. We can talk a big game that we should or we ought to, but if we think about it seriously, I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you live as an ancient person. Even a lot of the traditionalists I speak to, and they talk about living as a Bronze Age this or that, or an Iron Age this or that. I'm like, yeah, but if you have an awareness of what people were like back then, you're still doing this from a liberal, individualist, intellectual point of view. So this is all just, I hate to use the word LARPing, but it is. But if we recognize that problem, we have to understand, A, is it a problem? B, maybe the only people who can exit liberalism, as you know, are the people who initiated it, who created it. I don't think, you look at Islam and you say, here's a traditionalist culture. But the moment you give these people cell phones, they're the most ridiculous, degenerate people you've ever heard of. Like if you actually look at the behavior of these traditionalist cultures, when you expose them to modernity, they're gone. They're done. It's over. They're the biggest hedonists you ever heard. They don't have the equipment to travel through liberalism to whatever is on the other side. And maybe that's us. Maybe we're the only people that do that. However, you have to understand how much of your worldview is grounded within that framework.
Yeah, and this is the thing that people have to. There's multiple things kind of going on, right? So we talked about the sort of the manufacturing process, right? The guy that's halfway around the world dealing with the code that's in the control room, that's running the machine, that then is making the product, right? At a certain point in time, product does get made, right? So one of the things that Alul wants you to understand is that propaganda manipulation, things like the vibe shift, are not, in a sense, events in and of themselves. They can be, like, they can be non-events. They come and go, and they can turn out to be nothing. They're just, internet ephemera. And that's that this happens all the time, sort of what's the latest thing, who's the latest e-girl, what's the latest argument on the timeline. There is a crap ton of ephemera out there. But while that is going on, there are real world, quote unquote, put it in the right word, in vibe shifts that then do have real world implications. And a sophisticated propagandist is using those vibe shifts to lay the groundwork for real world action. So he's rewriting the code to create the ground that will allow him to act in the real world. And that's one thing that's one of those things, like a sort of media literacy and media awareness of trying to pick up on the tea leaves of like watching. This is where a mutual of ours, Black Horse and I have been talking about this thing called the pivot, and noticing across the elite global spectrum that there has been, again, a shift in vibe and messaging. And there's a lot of people say, well, it's all fake and gay. It's just another, it's just another of them trying to manipulate you to get your vibes and things, to thinking that's going to have something and they're going to pull the rug out from underneath you. And that's, I guess, the open question is this, a vibe shift that's meant to obfuscate them continuing doing what they're doing, and getting you believing that they're going to change things when they really aren't, or are they laying the groundwork for a larger change in policy? That's, so what's happening now is the vibe shift is happening that will enable them to shift policy in a year to 2 years from now. And the funny thing is, I think, like with what we call the pivot, say on things like immigration and other policies, conservatives aren't actually even the audience. The real audience is actually the people that they've been propagandizing for a decade and a half. That's going to take much deeper for them to believe the idea that immigration numbers have to come down.
Absolutely. And you'll see they're easier than you think too, because a lot of those who were the most vehement defenders of COVID lockdowns, if you talk to them now, they will say they were never in favor of them. And the only people who were really in favor of them were conservatives. Like they pivoted on that too. And the real danger of the pivot, and I think that's a more accurate, I believe that is what's happening. It's another way to describe it would be narrative hijacking, or just straight up subversion, saying that they can no longer, or it's no longer benefit them to push mass, unchecked, low skill labor migration. However, they're not going to give credit to the people who've been saying that the entire time. They've been saying it the entire time. It's only the conservative, and for their part, the conservatives will accept this and say, no, we've always been the mass immigration party. Never fails, but they will just, the new narrative pivot will be like Keir Starmer will do this. You'll see Carney do this. Like, well, the liberals were always on the side of lower immigration because it hurts labor rights. They'll just fucking lie. And then they might use that to box us out of the conversation, the people who've been right, that to their own interests, which have pivoted, which might be, they're changing the conversation on labor. I think that's what they're latching onto right now, saying the migrants, but there's a different sort of labor revolution that's going to be occurring in these first world countries. But there's a lot of things that are being, for a lot of their other plans. And I think that's what people like us look at, what's really going on. So if you were just into vibes, you would say, oh, the vibe shifted. So the consensus change. Shift means the consensus change. I don't accept that the consensus really changed. I think there are hard realities that they're going to deny that they were ever on side. Try doing what their real goal is, but with a new faceplate. Like DEI is going to go away. The woke is going to be put away. Okay, well, what is woke? That the tranny stuff is going to be put away, but will the civil rights be put away? I guess we shall see. I hear Trump is trying to dismantle that. I don't know. There's a lot
like
Yes,
it's
I
like
can do.
opening China. If the DEI thing is going to get dismantled, it's going to be the Democrats who do it. You have to realize it's not going to be Trump that does it. It's going to be the Democrats that do it. In the same way, if immigration is going to stop, it's going to be Labour in England that do it. And these are the things that people have to understand, is that conservatives, there are certain things can't do politically because you're larger liberal frame. And so
Yeah.
that certain things that there's certain liberals have to do, whether you like them or dislike them, and of whether they do them or not. And that's, you know, it's, and this gets back, it's essentially, well, how do you ground yourself? Augusto Del Noce made the argument that you ground yourself in ontology. He called it which a term he sort of used and maybe abandoned or whatever. But the idea is that to grasp the deeper metaphysical realities, and he talked about the right. So, is that you actually encounter God within the fences, the language, a living tradition. And so in a sense that you read the scripture, you go to church, but you actually meet God. Of God, this creates the grounds now for your philosophy and your and your thinking. The vibes do not. And I think that there's something fundamental. You're looking to ground yourself metaphysically with reality. So sometimes, in a sense, working with your hands can be a way to. It gets you in touch with physical reality. And craftsmen generally tend to be politically conservative. It's grounded, and also religious folks is have in metaphysics, in the physical world, circuits the ability of that direct contact with God, with physical reality.
That's a good point. And just to give a head, there's a couple other talking points adopted by the empire, however you want to phrase it. I can see them pivoting on a big topic on our side for a long time. Carney come out against birth control. I think the control and say, okay, they're pro-natal.
Reasons why women have to stop using birth control.
So but then what does that mean? Will they, like, or for example, when you'll see the on housing, they'll start saying, you know what? However, the quality of the houses will be either lower quality overall. Hey, the vibe shifted on family housing. Good. It's not what you want. It's not what you into how these things are being absorbed and reframed. What you actually want, and you make their talking points on our side. Could you see be used to serve some other whole e-accelerationism movement? They're taking you humanist perspective. It's like, yes, ideal human health be achieved through scientific manipulation, formation, and sexual propagation. Genetics, but you also is that good overall, or is that a subversion?
Yeah, and well, okay, now I'm here. So this is, I love when Jay does this. Future, like they're one of the things that I'm going to really think about the technocratic administrative state. that we can. The problem is that once you of and you have to accept the frame, it's geared. That's in a sense of, the conservative, which policies the best, quote unquote, conservative becomes policy. But all of the frame of the political we saw in completely differentiated from the Liberal Party. What did Mark Carney and the Conservative Party, what they're under system within the this is thing essentially playing a game. And it's ultimately you have this frame than
my son, but to the end.
People find you. Even just Vanguard is
perfect. Oh, thank God.